Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy. In this episode, I'm sharing a conversation I had with an individual who has 2 degrees in economics. So he has a degree in microeconomics and a degree in macroeconomics, and we are talking about the Onlyfans ban, when they banned explicit content. Since we had this conversation, Onlyfans decided to suspend their decision to ban X-rated content. It may come back in the future as it is only suspended, but as of now, X-rated content is still allowed on OnlyFans. That being said, I think this conversation is incredibly valuable. So if you're interested in understanding why OnlyFans made the decision, whether they'll make it again in the future, and the underlying ideological and economic reasons behind the decision, keep watching. Okay. Hello, Jeremy. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jeremy. I have 2 master's degrees in economics, one in macroeconomics and one in institutional finance. So I understand both macroeconomics from a larger framework, and institutional finance helps me understand what they would classify as like microeconomics or business-to-business relations. That's a pretty good summary of me, I guess.
Right. And obviously what we're talking about today is... Oh, God, I think it is. So what we're going to talk about today is the OnlyFans debacle. You know, OnlyFans are now banning sex work. They're banning all explicit adult content, which is unclear exactly what that means. It seems that they're banning anything that is... Like they're allowing nudity, but anything past the point of nudity, so anything that was like considered sex work, would be banned and considered adult only. So obviously, this is the majority of that platform as it stands, and they have over 2 million creators, the vast majority of which will essentially lose their livelihoods in the sense like they're not going to be able to make that content anymore. They can swap to, non-nude content or even artistic nude, I do believe, but anything that contains pornography or any sort of adult content will be banned on the platform. So I just want to make it clear, not everyone on the platform is a millionaire. Most people are actually the average content creator makes $1,000 a month from what I'm aware. So I mean, if you consider that the majority of the creators are not actually these huge names who are bringing in hundreds of thousands a month, the vast majority of which are actually bringing in around $1,000 a month. So we're not talking about people who are, going to be set up for life. And so this happening to them isn't going to really make a difference. We're talking about people who are really maybe even living paycheck to paycheck, have bills to pay, and are about to lose their livelihoods. So yeah. Why do you think OnlyFans have done this anyway?
So it's kind of multifaceted as to why they're doing it. I think the biggest and probably worst reason that they're carrying this out is actually getting outside money from investors is a way for their main investor to essentially cash out of his investment that he made. I believe it was 2016. I could be wrong on the date. I haven't looked at the charts for a while, but when he helped really get OnlyFans off the ground, up and going. So as you bring in outside money, it allows your original seed investors to cash out to some degree. So if he put in, we'll say $50 million, I haven't seen the actual deal, and you raise $1 billion, you can set aside, X amount for this person, this original investor and the original founders to cash out to some degree. So even as a capitalist, it's kind of sickening to watch people build a company on others' backs and then not only turn their back on them, but turn their back on them in such a selfish way, essentially saying, not only are we getting rid of you, but you're going to watch me get paid off of everything that you did. So that's one reason.
Yeah, that is quite concerning. So, like in the most simplistic terms, that's essentially someone has built a corporation using independent workers as a way to provide content, sold that content and made money. Even in the process, they made 20% of that. They took 20% of that revenue. That built up their share price, and then off the share price, they've then levied that in order to gain outside investors, so that they could cash out their original investment and make obviously a load of money on it.
Yeah, so that's a simplified version. It's a bit more complicated because they don't actually have shares, but that's close enough. And
Okay.
the other thing to note that you said earlier is the average creator, I believe they say, makes like a thousand bucks. But what's even more important to remember about that is that average is skewed by your people at the very, very top who are making great money. There are a few of them. But in reality, if you're not in the top, 10% of creators, you're barely squeaking by. And so, if you were already struggling on this platform, struggling to get by in life, and now they take away that extra $300, $400, $500 a month that you're making as, I don't want to call it lower tier, but a less big content creator. I mean, it's even worse than losing $1,000 a month, because those people are at least able to maybe get a little bit of savings. But if you're just barely squeaking by and a tiny brand new creator, this could just absolutely crush you. So that's just something to keep in mind, that average number is sometimes deceiving, because the people at the top kind of skew that number higher. Whereas if you look at the median number, it tells a bit more true story.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what people forget is that when you are if you are a sex worker on this platform, if you are someone who's trying to make adult content, you're doing so as an independent contractor. There's no safety net for you. There's nothing there that's going to protect you. And you've most likely give up maybe a job or some sort of more secure income. And then you also have the worry of, well, you've made an OnlyFans account now. You've been making adult content. What's your likelihood of further employment?
Yeah, absolutely. But and this is maybe something, maybe an offshoot slightly, but it's one of the sad things of today's day and age, that we still, for some reason, look down on sex workers as either a content creator or dancers or whatever. These people work very, very hard, and to see them not just, again, tossed aside and then to be cashed out on in the way that they are, it almost makes me physically ill, because I could put myself in that spot and seeing somebody get a $150 million check at the same time that I'm getting my walking papers. And as you said, I have no social safety net at this point, and what's on the internet stays on the internet. It's it's almost like borderline abusive type practice, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. So other than, do you think there's a motivation other than the fact that the main investor's cashing out, or do you think that there is an actual business move here for the platform?
Oh, so there definitely is business moves here. I think from a business aspect, so we can start at the macro perspective. Both Apple and Google have certain contracts for their app store, and part of that is no quote unquote adult content. Now, obviously, if OnlyFans wants to expand their audience, their platform, they have to get into the app store, and that necessitates them making this move. So that's one. So that's like a huge picture. On a smaller scale, anytime you have a platform that has adult content, there's going to be illicit adult content and illegal forms of it. And it was already starting to pick up steam, and they were saying, we have safety checks in place. But when you go back and look and realize they only banned 15 creator accounts last month, when they have, I want to say 300,000
2
earning
million.
creators. It's
2 million.
probably a higher number.
2 million now. It's 2 million creators now.
Yeah, okay, 2 million. That's right. Maybe 300,000 was like the top 12%.
Yeah, I mean, it was much lower before the pandemic, actually. It was less than half.
Like 2020.
Yeah, so like it has been incredible growth in the last 2 years. But sorry, continue.
Yeah, you're right about that. I think the number I saw was like 559% in 2020, which is insane. But they were getting more illegal content, which is obviously going to be regulatory cost, monitoring cost, and so from that point, that means you're kind of hitting your peak margin point. So the only way to counteract that is to grow your market in size to the point where those regulatory costs and those maintenance costs kind of offset with your total addressable market. And then there was one more reason. I'm trying to remember the other thing that. Oh yes, that's right. So the other thing is like in a lot of like investment deals, you go through companies called VCs, which are venture capitalists, and typically they're formed under a business type called an LLP, which is a limited liability partnership. And most of those partnerships, the way they're written in their articles, the boards will actually dictate that you cannot invest in, certain things like obviously drugs, adult, pornography. So this move is not only going to make them more palatable to Apple and Google to grow their total addressable market, but it also at least releases funds to the extent from VCs that they can even invest in it if they like the idea. Because right now their hands are tied. Just from what I've personally read and heard from people in the industry is that when they began shopping for this investment, they could not even get a second look at $1 billion valuation. Well, if this was let's say like a pure tech play, like a Curiosity Stream or a Skillshare, they would have had investors out the door.
Yeah,
but
because of the size
of what the content was, that they couldn't get any respect, so to speak.
Yeah, and is that they would have had to invest as primarily because of the size of the platforms, massive, and incredible amounts of users. There's actually, I think there was more than twice as many users as there was creators. So like, or even more than that. So like, obviously the size of the platform is huge, and it's bringing in $1 billion revenue, but it still can't get investors because of the sex work label.
Exactly, and that's both just from their articles, from the when I say articles, it's like what makes a company what it is, their board of directors essentially, and their worry that OnlyFans won't be able to gain like brand partnerships, which is a lot of what drives app revenue. You look at Facebook, you look at YouTube, or any social media site, so to speak, or any social media platform. It's all driven by ad revenue. And so the worry as an investor would be, there's no way, if this content stays what it is, that we're going to be able to get brand partnerships for that ad revenue, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So here's the question then. If they've from what I've seen, they made $1 billion in 5 years because of the 20% that they took from creators. Now, obviously, there's going to be costs involved with that, as you say, and in increasing costs that are going up. So they're going to look for new forms of revenue. It seems that they are capping out the market in terms of sex workers. Like they'd already have millions of content creators, and the growth that they are having in terms of subscribers, in terms of like customers, I don't think is going to offset the costs, as you were saying, of increased regulatory costs. So they're looking for investment. So with this investment, they've managed to secure $1 billion deal. Now, that $1 billion deal is the equivalent of the wealth that they've made in 5 years. So do you think that there is an issue here that it almost seems that with the way that this sort of tech industry is working, the productive enterprise, like the creation of the content, is no longer the source of revenue, but rather that there is a meta market which exists as purely, how do we secure investors? So we end up with, the average everyday content creator kind of being a secondary thought in the way that they are essentially trying to monetize their business. Do you think that's representative of the way the market's at, or do you think that's too simplistic?
No, I don't. I actually don't think it's too simplistic, and I think it's a good critique. I think something to kind of speak on is the fact that, and me and you have talked about this slightly before, is that to some degree, OnlyFans was acting like as what we call a blue ocean, a blue ocean creator. They were pushing into a new market as far as sex workers that are interactive, on demand, as a platform. That was something nobody else was doing to the degree that they were. But typically, any business that is pushing into a new area like that, their whole goal is to acquire as many subscribers or as many users as possible, and that entails a absolute it's almost an unimaginable amount of money to get something like that rolling. So this $1 billion would have been the first of probably 15 series of fundings, and probably the first of probably $100 billion of what would be investor losses, essentially. And so that funding to grow the market itself, because that's really what they're paying for, right? They're paying to grow a market out of nothing, and that takes advertising and word of mouth and just a social reconditioning of people. That takes a lot of money. You almost have to do what you said, this meta idea of we can't focus on what the content creators are really even earning, or really think about how to help them more, because we must focus on keeping investors happy so we can grab this market share. And even to the extent that they were already kind of disadvantaging content creators from the perspective that I think you probably know this better than me, but I think Patreon takes between like 5 and 12%. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, it's not.
What'd you say?
It's not as much as OnlyFans, who take about 20%. Yeah,
20%, exactly. And then if you think of it, going to the App Store, well, now the content creator is also going to have to shoulder the cost of it being on the App Store as well. So they were already, or the move to the App Store was already going to disadvantage the content creator to an even larger extent. But the business, as sad as it is to say, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, they're not worried about the content creator because someone else will come along, is kind of the attitude, right? And that's why you'll see the early investors cash out. They got this up and running, and now the investors who are just going to pour money into this will step in and say, we don't really care about the content creators. They're all just numbers to us. We're just going to try and grow this market, fund this how we have to, so that our future profits will be large because we dominate the market, if that makes sense. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that answers the question. I think, I guess like there is other issues that I kind of want to touch on. Is obviously the investment that grows this market essentially allows it to enter the App Store, which would have disadvantaged the creators. But it seems to me that the reason that the creators would be disadvantaged in this case is because no matter what, they're always being seen as a means to an end, right? Like, now that's because of the way that the business is kind of structured, that they have to be a means to an end, because the overall goal is not anything to do with these independent contractors who are working with the platform, but rather the platform itself and its success. Now, obviously, there has to be a balance there. Like, you would think, like, obviously no one joins the platform won't do well. So they haven't totally messed over the creators at every step of the way. But it does seem that they've put them on the back burner. And I think that, the case in point would be the Bella Thorne incident. The Bella Thorne incident, she made like £1 million in a day, or $1 million in a day, from pay-per-view. Now, she was charging, I think, $300 or something for pay-per-views of apparently nude selfies. $200 for pay-per-views for nude selfies. And then when people opened them, they weren't actually nudes. They were just bikini photos. And so it was a lot of them demanded their money back. Now, obviously, OnlyFans didn't really want to do that. And what OnlyFans have now done is, or what they did do, is prevent people from pay-per-viewing for anything above $50. The cap was $50. So that way, like, Bella Thorne charges $200 for one photo. She makes £1 million in a day, and she's still loaded. But the average creator now cannot charge more. There is a price ceiling being put on that market. So what do you think? Because OnlyFans puts a price floor and a price ceiling in this sense. There is I don't know if I'm using the terminology right, actually, but there is a the minimum price is $3 and the maximum price is $50. How do you think that would have affected the average creator?
So I actually don't think that is hugely impactful. More than anything, that Bella Thorne event hurt, real creators, and that kind of speaks to her disrespect of the everyday sex worker. And I think part of why OnlyFans got away with what it did was because sex workers in general have this stigma of less than, or I don't like saying dirty, because that's not my point of view. I actually think they work really hard. But there's this social stigma of them having to be sort of outcasts, and OnlyFans was the only place that really gave them any sort of outlet. And so I think that's why sex workers basically had to accept any stipulation that OnlyFans was putting out, because they understood, I can't go to YouTube and do this. I can't go to, well, I don't actually know if you can do it on Patreon, to be honest with you. I don't know their rules, but it's not what it's known for.
Yeah, you can't do sex work on Patreon. You can be nude again, but Patreon did a very similar thing, actually. They built it off sex work and then switched over.
Okay, so exactly, right? So it's the same process, is that we're going to use these young, or typically young, I'll say, disadvantaged people to some degree, disadvantaged in the sense that this is their only option, and we're going to force them to follow our rules, and then when we're done with them, we're just going to throw them away. And in the meantime, they're going to have to accept any rule that we want. Now, the opposite side of this coin is, if you read the bylaws really carefully of what they put out, it says, you can't publicly post X, Y, and Z. I don't know if that means that DMs are still going to be, allowed to some degree, like some sort of email exchanges or whatever. That's my only hope for this platform, is that we don't have all the details yet on that front, because they said more is still coming, and that hopefully they still allow these people who built the platform to make what they deserve. If that,
yeah. Well, here's the
that's
thing.
my hope.
If you were a sex worker on the platform, coming from a econ standpoint, what would your next moves be?
So for me personally, I would go and get my own domain and my own server, but I would continue to utilize OnlyFans as a branding point. I would say, if you like my content here on OnlyFans, where I display, artistic nudes or implied nudes. If you enjoy this sort of content, go to my website where you can buy, more explicit content where I work as a sex worker, so that all my hard work that was poured into, 1, 5, 10 years, however long they've been working, isn't wasted to any degree.
Yeah.
They just, it's almost just, it's taking control back to yourself and not relying on a platform. That would be my personal move.
I think that's
just because.
I think that's
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think that's the ideal move. Like, I do think that is the best thing to do, as well, and it's something that that I've said before as well. Like, in terms of even any online creator, we're all very dependent upon the platforms that we use, and more often than not, we can face backlash. There was the YouTube adpocalypse. There's people who get shadow banned on various, like, whether it's Instagram or whatever. People don't realize how vulnerable they are to small policy changes. And I think that the only way you can kind of combat this is to have your own platform to secure an audience if anything was to go south. And, as you say, if you use the OnlyFans platform as a branding point, well, that's great, because now you've got your brand. Move that brand somewhere else, and monetize it somewhere else. I think as well, what's worth mentioning is you can message, you can message all of the expired subscribers, and you can send them to a free platform. So long as you want, sending them somewhere that is where you're charging, you can actually send them, and that's totally within the policy. So if you want to message all of your subscribers and say, go check out what I'm talking about on Twitter, and on Twitter you're talking about moving to your own platform or moving to another platform, even if it's something like AVN, Stars, ManyVids, whatever, well, then that's what you can do. And I think that's a way to, like, try and minimize or, like, cut losses at this point. Would you say that would probably be the best thing that they could do?
Yeah, I would say that is the path I would take, and I would maybe even push it a step further, where I would say, okay, now I'm established on OnlyFans in this way. This is my name. I'm now going to brand the same way on Patreon. Even if I don't pick up a ton of people from this, I'm going to post essentially the same content, this same adult content that isn't banned on either site, and create, what we essentially just a branding circle where everything is always focusing back to my own site, my own platform, where I can monetize it, and I'm not stuck at the behest of a platform. And with the ease of back-end payment systems, you don't have to worry about credit cards or anything like that. It's so easy to set up websites nowadays. That would be my own personal move. Just brand on every possible social media, every possible fan interaction place, whether it's Patreon, YouTube, ManyVids, MFC, all that stuff for sex workers. I would try and brand myself so totally through everything that anytime anybody searched my name anywhere, it would lead back to my website.
Yeah, I think I would absolutely agree with that, and I think that's really sound advice. Thank you. So,
of course.
One last thing. So, there is the ideological point. So, obviously, this has been an ideological move in many ways. Like, the reason that, sex work is demonized in our society, why investors aren't interested, and why, individuals aren't, why they're not willing to invest in a sex work platform is an ideological point. Like, clearly they're not wanting to associate with a certain sort of brand and type. And obviously that's why Apple and Android have their hands tied as well, right? So do you think that, like, obviously this is coming from like a twofold, I think, ideological, like a two-horned kind of ideological attack? I think that there is the ideology of those who are anti-sex work, but many of which are, ordinary people who consume sex work, but then they have, like, maybe they don't want to associate themselves with sex work, or they don't want sex work associated with their families, and they worry about their kids finding it, and like they have a disdain for it. And then you've also, in a mix with those people, you've got your kind of radical groups. You've got your evangelicals, you've got your you've got your fundamentalist religious people and stuff like that, who see it as sinful and wrong. And then on the other horn, you seem to have this sort of capitalist ideology of profit and this need to facilitate the largest possible market, which at this point seems to be this unfriendly sex work environment. Now, Hassan Abi, I don't know if you've heard of him, made a tweet saying, Visa and MasterCard buckling to evangelical psychos and successfully pressuring OnlyFans to limit sex work on their platforms is awful but expected. Caving to that demand when sex work built your platform is a betrayal. Everyone loves sex work but dehumanizes the people who make it. Now, it seems to me, come from my position, that he's right in the sense that this is a betrayal. He's right that Visa and MasterCard are buckling to an ideological pressure, or like OnlyFans are buckling to an ideological pressure. Mm-hmm. But do you really think that it would be enough to say that it's evangelical psychos, or do you think that there has to be a larger market and an ideology involved?
So I would agree that evangelicals do act that way, but I don't think that they're what singularly creates this sort of political pressure. I actually think if you look at the political party in charge right now, pretty overwhelmingly, it's more progressive ideology. Now we still have a lot of I don't want to call them crazy righties, but very conservative people. But in my experience, and I've dealt with just full exposure here of myself. I used to date a sex worker, and some of the most vitriolic responses she got were from progressive people who said, "You don't respect yourself. You're feeding into the misogyny of society." And my former ex used to say, like, "This is what I enjoy doing. I'm expressing myself," and they would just continue to talk down to her in the sense that you don't understand, you're traumatized, and almost infantilize her to the point that no matter what she did, she was wrong. So I don't think it just comes from one side. I think it's a three-horned attack, basically the two horns you mentioned, as well as to some extent you get progressives, or I don't know if they're progressives or not. That's probably a poor choice of words, but you get liberals maybe who hate that women can be free, make money off their body, and it not be a disrespect to themselves, or maybe not a hate, but they don't understand that. Is probably the best thing I would say. So I would say it's pressure from all sides for these poor girls, honestly.
Well, I think that, like, if we're going to bring it back into some perhaps relevant content that was made recently, if anyone saw the ContraPoints Envy video, I think that envy plays a big role in this. I think that people see sex work as through a lens of envy a lot of the time. It's not that, like, I see a lot of young men kicking off about how it's the easiest job in the world. How it's the easiest job in the world, even though it's not. Or how, they're only successful because they're pretty and young and all of this stuff. And it just comes from a side of like malice and hatred, but because they wish they were as successful, and they wish, and often, and from another point of view, it's often that they wish that they were that sex object.
Mm-hmm.
And so you tend to see that there is this sort of envy and malice in society that I don't think is attributable to pure conservative ideology. And I think that the strange thing about this is that both ideologies in some way should be happy about sex work. The right wing, in the sense that it's the monetization of an individual's what was it, like essentially like it is like small business owners. Like these individuals are essentially what are considered the backbone of the right wing sort of ideologue. Who do we care about? Small business owners, constantly being reaffirmed within the minds of the voter. Do it for your mom and pop companies. But as soon as your mom and pop companies wear bikinis, well, no, that's not okay, So it just seems like it gets pushed back because of maybe the Christian aspect or the conservatism. But then obviously on the left, it should be an expression of female empowerment. Women who would have otherwise perhaps ended up in, like porn corporations or something like that. Adult networks are no longer forced into that framework. They're no longer having to go and, work for someone as seedy and disgusting as Brazzers or something like that. They can now do what they want and have complete control over their content. But it seems that is, undermined to the nth degree. Whilst these same people would complain about the exploitation of someone like Maya Khalifa. So it seems so weird to see what is a contradiction in both ideological poles of society. In many ways, they should both be pro sex work or pro independent content creation, but then they always seem to push back on it. And I think the only explanation that comes to mind is a psychoanalytic one. It's a position of envy. It has less to do with the ideology and more to do with your ability to consume in relation to theirs.
Well, I think that's exactly it. And you're almost touching on, like, from the psychoanalytic point of view, the thing that I've thought about oftentimes is that both of these ideologies, they both essentially view that sex work as the other, that less than. But what they're not acknowledging is that, if we get into Lacan again, that real sense of the unspoken thing here is that I dislike you, but nobody is even going to voice that we all consume this and that we all know that we consume this, yet no one will say that we consume this. So it's that lack of acknowledgement that everybody consumes this, and instead I'm going to cover that with this symbolic order of dislike for you instead. And to me, I think that dislike is rooted in maybe not envy, but the covering of their consumption of that sex work and the taboo that is
maybe
for many people.
That's a good way to look at it. Like maybe it's a way of coping with their own self-loathing, and you see this a lot. I mean, the recently there was a man who killed Asian women, Asian sex workers, and the reason he killed them was because he was a sex addict who kept going to massage parlors and having sex with them. But he was also a Christian, and he's like an evangelical Christian, and so he couldn't cope with the quote unquote like addictive, the addiction that he was going through. Like he wasn't actually challenging the structure of addiction. He wasn't challenging these modes of consumption, and instead sought to blame the other for the way he was consuming. He couldn't control himself, and so took it out on somebody else. It seems to me like I could completely believe that this was somewhat akin to sex work as well. It's almost as if that everyone has an aspect of shame perhaps internalized within them with their consumption of sex work, yet that doesn't turn into a form of, self-development and growth and trying to perhaps make a healthier relationship with themselves and the content they're consuming, but rather hate the content creator.
Exactly. And in that hating the content creator, that they're not acknowledging that reel of their consumption that is unspoken, if that makes sense.
Yeah, their
That's
choice.
that's been my take on it for some time now, just because you do see oftentimes the largest consumers of this adult content of sex workers' times are also the most vitriolic people in public,
Yeah,
which is just such,
paradox.
if you don't study psychoanalytics, it seems so backwards. But it falls right in line with what we're saying, and it's sad because instead you could just enjoy that person enjoying themselves, that person, hopefully make their day better at their job, because at the end of the day, these are just people that are working like the rest of us. And so, I guess that's my whole thing. It's just we somehow we need to help, hopefully change the stigma for all the men and women that work in sex work. From a psychoanalytic point of view, that's what I've come to.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that this is perhaps the reality of where we're standing in terms of not just psychoanalytics but philosophy. It seems that there is this inability for individuals to reclaim their modes of consumption, and that's what Hegel was talking about this entire time. Like we're moved between abstract poles of right and hedonism. Where it's like it's absolute, it's completely unrestricted or it's completely restricted. And people aren't willing to accept that freedom, which is finding that middle ground, finding, okay, well, what is the rational mode of consumption here? Like, I am a sexual being. How should I express that? Like understanding those in-laden drives and trying to express them in a way, in desires that are healthy and, secure. But then there is also the aspect of a societal, the ideology of society and how that internalizes in individuals. People feel shame for the desires that are given to them by society. We seem to have a society that proclaims to have Christian origins, and because of that, it developed a sexual taboo, which people express. Like the more you restrict sex, and the more that the restrict this sort of mode of consumption, the more people are going to enjoy that restriction. And that's what they don't understand. So the more that you're going to fight, to try and keep Onlyfans, or like your society pure, the filthier it's actually going to get. The more depraved the taboo will actually become, because the individuals will want more of that taboo. They'll want to feel like a moment of freedom because they're going to feel so restricted within society. And so there needs to be this balance within society that I don't see coming around. I don't see people. I think it was coming around a lot more in the OnlyFans community. I think people were starting to treat sex workers as humans, and at least like individual subscribers rather than corporations. We're starting to treat sex workers as humans, understanding that that they're just on that daily grind. They're just trying to make that money. Like everyone is in our society. So why are we judging them? And if they're having a good time and we're having a good time, what's the problem? But it seems that it would be such a shame for any ideological progress that was perhaps being made in this regard to kind of go down the drain.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, and so that's why ultimately I hope, from a sex worker's point of view, that we see a lot of them to some extent get fed up of the cycle of the hamster wheel, so to speak, that they're stuck in, from Patreon to OnlyFans to there. I know there's been several other sites where they now are just going to say, okay, look, I've seen the cycle enough times. I'm just going to continue to use this platform instead of getting kicked off and establish my own. And that's my biggest hope, is that if anyone is a subscriber on that sort of thing, that they stay with those content creators and they continue to support them and encourage them to continue on, and not just give up because things seem difficult. If they can take that step, that is part of changing the stigma.
Yeah. And one last thing, I suppose, actually. How do you think, like, so as a socialist, as you can imagine, I'm wanting to come from a position where I think that these corporations are, put as you say, putting them on a hamster wheel, and that this is the result of a profiteering mindset at the expense of the creator. And so the creator, if they want to be an independent creator, funding their own platform is a good idea. But another way that they can benefit is through collaboration, which is why OnlyFans and the sex work community has formed such like close ties. Do you think that it would be worth even forming something like a cooperation or some sort of union in which they could, pay for hosting, or individuals could join, pay for hosting, and then have a platform which is, for the creators and by the creators, or by the creators and for the creators?
I mean, I think it's certainly an idea to explore. I think the main issue there, and this is kind of goes back to that meta game that we talked about earlier, is that the kind of growth and just generalized costs, regulatory costs, et cetera, that something like that takes. I mean, it would truly have to be a huge movement of individuals, which would be great to see. It would be almost a union. I think you said union, a unionization of sex workers, which would be awesome. It would just be, insane money, and at that point, you are competing with corporations. That is the hard thing, right? Is that ultimately, if you use the corporation to your advantage, you use it for your branding, and then direct to your own site, you're almost negating the negation of your previous. You're using that surplus to push to your site. Whereas, I don't think your idea is impossible. It would just be very difficult from a business perspective. But I support your idea because I'm trying to be supportive of socialist ideas lately.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I understand. I think that you're right in saying that, like, obviously, growth in a capitalist market seems to be the hard. I mean, like, it is the hardest thing that socialists have ever struggled with, right? Like, whether it's from a macroeconomic scale or a microeconomic scale, how do we compete with the drive of profit, and then obviously the market blocks that are in place from already established corporations and ideologies. I just see this as perhaps a opportunity for sex workers to, rather than to be, like allow each other to be used and so on, and then sort of discarded, to kind of think of ways in which they can aid each other. Like, obviously, corporations are good, but, perhaps difficult to form. I think that or at least used to compete against other platforms. I think the beautiful thing is, in this market, as you say, no need to compete against OnlyFans, no need to compete against Patreon. Use their platforms because they're going to need creators to promote your own platform. And I think you can do that independently. And I think if you want to try and make this into some sort of cooperative enterprise where individuals can then, have a discover feature, and find other sex workers on there, all the better. And then you're sharing traffic and you're sharing a consumer base. Try and move past this need for like absolute competition, and perhaps into something that's a little bit more, cooperative. But yeah, I do think it's going to be a difficult task.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It'll always go back to that hard idea of growth. But I think that almost in a poetic sense, if I want to put myself in your shoes, it would be absolutely amazing to see, instead of sex workers being put down and degraded to an extent for their hard work, be able to see them lead in a way, form a cooperative based on their hard work, and based on their own self-value, and not being used by a corporation anymore, and show that there is a way to accomplish something like that. I think that would be quite great and beautiful, in a poetic sense, to see them get to kind of flip the script in that way.
Yeah, it's a matter of how, and and like the means of doing it. I think that this is the issue is that it has to be collective, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to have to come from a place of genuine mutual well-being, where you, like, sex workers aren't going to have to, or like just anyone who wants to do this is not going to have to just think of themselves, but think of the overall community. And I think that if you're a big sex worker on OnlyFans, it's going to be hard to convince someone like that to join a collection of individuals who, for the most part, have much less to offer them.
I was feeling really optimistic about your idea until you said all that, Lewis.
Yeah,
we switched sides there.
Yeah, no. The thing is, I think it can be done. I think that I think it can be done because I think there is quite a bit of mobility in sex work. They go up, they go down. They go up, they make the money, and then they leave a lot of the time. So it's not the biggest deal. Like, I think that, like, just because there's some big names, like, their audiences often subscribe to more than one individual. Like, I don't know, like, I don't imagine that there are that many people on OnlyFans subscribed to a single account.
No, I don't think so. I think, and so I'm clear. I was just joking with you because we had kind of swapped.
Yeah, no, I know.
But I think they definitely can do it. And to these, it's predominantly women, but women and men and theys. They are ingenious, and they are hardworking. And if any group of people can do it, I truly believe that it probably is sex workers, because these people often take mud and turn it into gold, metaphorically speaking. So I think if there's any good that comes out of it, it would be something along the lines of, you mentioned, a communal movement. And if that doesn't happen, then hopefully we at least see the individualistic betterment of selves, to where this platform doesn't just destroy a bunch of people, because that would be truly sad when it really did help a lot of people in the pandemic.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, like, people don't realize that the only source of income at the time was really e-commerce, and Amazon made a hell of a lot of money, but the average everyday individual was dependent upon essentially government assistance, except for those people who could work from home. And this gave people an amazing opportunity, and it's just sad to see that leave. But hopefully, as you say, things can end up working out okay, and content creators like myself and anyone else involved needs to help these creators find their place on a new platform, and help them get where they need to be. Because I think that at the end of the day, this is a whole sector of the economy, and this is to be honest, I see this as a very positive change in what has been a very seedy and corrupt industry. So fingers crossed, and everything will turn out okay.
Couldn't have said it better, my friend.